setting. So yeah, thanks for asking.
Okay, I think we are all set.
I'm pretty sure that's
Thank you.
yeah.
Well, this is House of Probes and will be again at 1 p.m. But for now, it's Progressive Caucus.
Oh, okay.
You're welcome to stay if you're interested in meetings. So okay, and now we're live. Okay, great. Okay. Welcome everyone to the House Progressive Caucus. It is January 24th, 2023, and today we have a couple of agenda items for our caucus. The first will be a standing item where we go through any bill introductions or co-sponsorship bills that members of our caucus are still working on, or guests from other caucuses feel free to bring those forward in the first 10 minutes of our meeting. I know a lot of bills are still coming forward, so we'll probably use this for a couple more weeks until the introduction deadline, which is in about mid-February. And then we will do a quick update from House leadership meeting from earlier this morning, and then spend most of our time with our guest here today to talk about housing, and specifically how housing policy is impacting renters here in the state of Vermont, and what more we could be thinking about as a legislature as we dive into some pretty big housing bills to make sure that renters are not left behind in the conversation. So we're very excited with our guests, and we'll do introductions with them in just a moment. Actually, let's start with introductions going around. I think that would work well. So I'm Representative Emma Mulvaney-Stanek. I represent a portion of Burlington, and I am the House Caucus leader for the Progressives for this biennium.
And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Representative Taylor Small, she and her pronouns from Winooski, the Assistant Progressive Caucus leader, and on the House Human Services Committee as well.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Troy Hedrick, also representing Burlington, a portion of it. And pronouns work well for me. I serve on Corrections and Institutions Committee, as well as the House Sexual Assault Prevention.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jess Hyman. I'm with CVOEO, the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity, with our statewide housing advocacy programs. And I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, I'm Representative Michelle Boslin from Westminster in Northern Windham County, and I serve on Corrections and Institutions Committee.
Hi, I'm Ann Sasson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm here as the interim executive director of the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition, and I come from the Upper Valley.
And I'm Michelle Kersey. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the chair of the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition.
Hi, Eric McGuire, representative for Rutland City. I sit on the House Committee of Institutions and Corrections. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to sit in and listen today. Thank you.
Welcome anytime. Yeah.
I'm Alana Tate from the House Clerk's Office.
I'm Sarah, the legislative assistant for the Progressives, and I live in Burlington.
And our other guests, do you want to introduce yourselves?
I'm Noah. I'm here mostly to take notes.
Great. Thanks, Noah.
I'm Matthew DeGroat, he, him pronouns, work for Action Circles as a legislative assistant. Also here to take notes.
Great. A lot of note taking happening. And I also use she, her pronouns.
And me too.
Thank you for modeling that. So with that, let's dive into bills from caucus members or visiting legislators from other caucuses that folks are interested in either telling the caucus about and or seeking co-sponsorship. I know you have one in your hot, or several in your hot head, Lily. Do you want to start? And then I have one to do an FYI on.
Yes, most folks have signed on to them already, but two new ones. One, I just will put the word out that it's an overdose prevention bill focused in human services. I have submitted it with just my name on it because I know that there's a more comprehensive bill coming out that will likely take priority. So it's more of suggestions of what we could add into that. So I'm not looking for co-sponsors, but just a forewarning when you see it come out, why it only has my name on it. But the other one is a continuation of the work of Representative Selena Colburn in her tenure, as well as Representative Emily Kornheiser in working on repealing our prostitution laws and really working on sex work decrim as that is our next adventure in making sure that we are protecting some of our most vulnerable workers out there.
And if you're interested in co-sponsorship, see Representative Small.
That's right.
Representative Hedrick, do you have any bills that you want to mention before I share one?
The first one should show up maybe tomorrow or the next day. This is the bill that will hopefully protect our teachers' ability to talk about race, racial identity, structural racism, and teach, present the curriculum from a gender affirming perspective. I have a new one that is going to look at UVM's enrollment and whether or not we should be actively capping that and guaranteeing more floor space per student who lives on campus, but that's early in the draft stages.
Thank you. And Representative Kate Logan has joined us. Hi, Kate. I hope you're feeling okay. Do you have any bills that you want? No pressure. Do you have any bills you want to share with the caucus that are coming up on your end?
I have a bill that's currently in the drafting stage, but not ready to discuss yet.
Maybe next week. Great. And then on my end, there's 2 bills that were introduced today. I have more coming through, and I have one that I'm still collecting sponsors on. But 2 introductions today, H98, which was the firearms bill, which a lot of folks signed on to. I think there was almost 30 sponsors. It's common sense gun regulation, including a piece that was in the Burlington Charter change 8+ years ago. So folks can find that online now. It's numbered H98. And then another one similar to Representative Small that just has my name on it because we're starting to take up unemployment issues in House Commerce where I serve is H92, which would extend a provision that was temporarily part of our unemployment laws during COVID, which expands the eligibility for when people can access unemployment for particular issues. Massachusetts did this permanently, and so we're hoping to follow suit. And that would be for urgent and compelling reasons related to someone getting injured or ill and recovering from that injury or illness and needing medical treatment, escaping domestic or sexual violence, for anyone who's had an unexpected loss of childcare. These are all reasons people have to step out of the workforce, obviously, or to care for an ill or injured family member. So those would all be reasons to temporarily be able to access unemployment, which is right now not legally allowed. So that's an H92, which is introduced today. And I hope that gets picked up when we talk about unemployment. The other quick bill that is, I'm still looking for sponsors if people are interested, is a recycle from last session on wage transparency, which would require employers to post what they pay for salary or wages in job postings, et cetera. So that helps to empower employees, especially women and people of color who often don't know what those wages are. And it contributes, unfortunately, to the gender and racial wage gap. It also would update our equal pay law to add gender and racial identity as a protected reasons to utilize equal pay. Right now, it's 20-something years old, and it only lists sex as an identifier. So it expand that access of that law to more folks. And then reliable work schedules is another provision in that bill. So I'm still collecting sponsors for folks watching at home. If you're a legislator and you want to sign on, just let me know. Anything else from other legislators in the room about bills you're proposing and seeking co-sponsors on and want to share? Yeah.
So I have one that I just got the sign-on sheet for today. It's related to making rental caps. I have a person in my district who, I should say, used to be in my district, who had a 2-bedroom, small little house that was $1,500 a month. And her landlord told her to renew her contract for the next year. It was going to be $3,000 a month. So it was going to be a double rate increase. And so I looked into this. There are a number of different states that have rental caps of varying amounts. It's a short form bill, and it basically caps 6% as the maximum annual increase for a rent. And it also makes a cap on how much you can charge for security deposit. So it's a short form bill. I'd be happy to have lots of sponsors before I send it to the Housing Committee. Are you only looking at housing bills or other things?
No, any bill today that you.
Okay. So I have one other one that's going to be coming out this week, which is, I'm not sure which committee it will end up going to, probably healthcare, but it's going to be a relatively short bill, not a short form bill, but it's seeking to establish a second peer respite facility for individuals who are experiencing mental health crisis. We currently have one center in Vermont, which is called Alyssum, which is a 2-bed, very short-term respite center, which gives somebody a space between being home and having a mental health struggle and going to the hospital. It provides an alternative level of care, a least restrictive environment where people can be supported and treated compassionately when that's what they seek. And right now we have literally 2 beds that are available, and this would be seeking to open an additional program of 2 beds. So it would be putting out an RFP to have a community build a second center, which would be available for Vermonters. And my hope is that in the long run, this would be both a compassionate alternative and also it would really end up saving the state money because lots of folks end up, when they're in a struggling space, they go to the very highest level of care because that's all that there is. And it's not the most effective, it's not the most kind, it's not the most appropriate, and it's also extremely expensive to put people in psychiatric hospitals when they maybe just need some support in a different kind of model. So I will be having that come out later this week, and I would love to have co-sponsors before I send that in.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Any other bills? Okay. All right. So briefly, just updates to the caucus around from House leadership today. So surprise, appropriations is temporarily meeting this room. Oh, surprise, more people, come on in. Appropriations is using this room just for this week. So this will, though, be the permanent meeting spot for the House Progressive Caucus public meetings at noon on Tuesdays. Everyone's welcome. Watch us live on YouTube or join us in person. Just this week, though, we're sharing with appropriations. So when we're done, we're going to leave I'm going to leave at least 5 minutes before so we can get back to the State House, those of us who do that way. But let's leave the space how we found it when we come back in, or when they come back in. On Thursday, House Rules will be meeting at noon to discuss remote voting procedures. So just a heads up to our caucus in particular. We'll talk more about this as needed, but we generally, the caucus tries to encourage this to be a good working workplace where we can actually access things safely when people are sick or there's storms and whatnot. So hopefully this remote access piece can be more expansive for people to be able to do this job. There's gonna be ethics training this Thursday after the floor. That is something that I would like all caucus members to attend if possible. So just put that in your calendars. And then next week, the House Discrimination Prevention Panel will be reviewing the policy at some point after the floor at next week. So look for that. And I think that in one last request, to our caucus, just be mindful of what we ask staff to do. There's been some requests that are outside the scope of their work, so please be respectful. They're here to do their professional jobs, not to help legislators with individual tasks or errands. So if you have any questions about that, just let me know, but let's be respectful of our staff. They do very important and good work here. All right, any questions on that? Okay, well, let's turn over the floor to our guests, which we're so appreciative of you all being here. We have 3 organizations that will be speaking to us today. There's one person who's coming a little bit later. So we sort of have the queue in a way that hopefully accommodates that person's schedule. But again, our major hope is to really just hear from you around all of the things that are swirling around housing. We know that there's a crisis, obviously, and we are particularly interested as a caucus around the impact on renting folks, working families who are in the renter situation. And what we should be thinking about in terms of things the legislature still has not addressed or it needs to do better on related to the renter's perspective. And of course, fold in anything else that you think would be important for us to know. And I believe the order we figured out today was we were going to first hear from the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition. So our interim director the interim director, Anne is here, also with the chair of that coalition, Michelle. So thank you both for being here. And after that, we'll go over to CBOEO, but I'll introduce Jess at that point. So please and welcome.
Thanks so much for having us. So I want to just start by giving you an overview of what I hope to do in the 5 minutes that we have. I want to first talk a little bit about the housing crisis that we're facing as a state, talk about the opportunity that we have to address it, talk about what our hopes are from the legislature this session and our specific legislative priorities. Michelle Kersey is here with me and is going to speak directly to rental protections as part of our 5 minutes. So as we all know, Vermont is facing a generational housing crisis. The Vermont Housing and Finance Agency recently estimated that the state will need 40,000 additional units by 2030. We know that rental wages are among the highest in the country. Vermont has the lowest rental vacancy rate, and in some cases, that rate is even lower than the state rate. All of these things said, we have an opportunity this session to address this crisis. We have a lot of the pieces in place, and I really want to speak to the opportunity, not simply to the crisis, which is well known and well documented. Many of the pieces are in place. We have evidence-based models that have been tried in our state and in other places. We have pandemic innovations that we can build on. There's a public awareness of the crisis. There's political will across all parties, and we also have an infusion of federal resources crisis still in the state that can be used to accelerate progress. Our hopes as a coalition is that you will do a few things. First, we need to bring the solutions that are working to scale. We know and can talk in more detail about some of those solutions that many things are working, but they don't exist nearly at the scale that we need. Second, we need to sustain and accelerate the pipeline of development of affordable housing. We know that there has been important investments made over the last couple of years, but we need sustained investment to reverse the effects of decades of underinvestment in policies that have limited housing development. This is not a crisis that will be solved this year, next year, or in the next 5 years. It's going to take a long time to get out of this crisis, but important steps can be taken now. Next, we think it's really important to create bridges to permanent housing for Vermonters who are unhoused. We know that we won't be able to solve this crisis this year, but we need to create bridges to permanent housing, not cliffs into homelessness. Finally, to speak to your legislative priorities, it's really important for us to put enabling and equitable policies in place to support development as well as protect all Vermonters. And Michelle will speak more directly to that. I want to speak just briefly to our specific priorities. First, we're hoping to see capital investments in affordable housing. We want to see full statutory funding for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, as well as $175 million in capital investments as an important next step to addressing the housing crisis. Second, it's important that we invest at a greater level in supportive and human services. We know that many need supportive services to be successful in housing, and we need to pair those investments in infrastructure with these services. We want to see investments in manufactured home communities as well as in farm worker housing, and we want to see these investments made with attention to equity. Finally, we think it's important to have enabling equitable policies and protections in place, including zoning reforms and tenant protections. And I want to pass on to Michelle so she can speak much more directly to those points.
Yeah, so in terms of zoning reforms, I think part of our struggle is that when we have individual towns and cities within the state only looking at the housing needs of their communities and not looking at the broader needs of the region or of the state, some choices are made that might be best for the community but aren't best for the entire region. And so I understand that there are a number of proposals about zoning reforms that are being put forth this session. And a lot of them so far look really promising from our perspective. And in terms of renter protections, we always want to ensure that the rights of individual renters as well as the rights of the renters who are currently housed are protected. And so looking at things like just cause eviction measures, looking at ways to help individuals have the resources that they need if they're faced with eviction are key components to that. There are other proposals out there. I'd love to hear that you're looking at rent caps because rent caps is something that we've discussed, has not been discussed with the membership at this point, but I think it's something that we would seriously look into as being an effective way of protecting renters at this time.
I'd love to just hop in for the next person and say that I know that we're having, between me and Brian, I'm trying to use my screen, but just some typing feedback on the stream. So I wasn't sure if maybe, I don't know if the audio is coming through here or if there's a speaker, but maybe there's a speaker coming over there. Right here? Okay. Brian, maybe I'll just pop it over there really quick, if that's okay. Or we could just move. Sorry, y'all.
Good just to make sure we have a good audio.
Brian, could you just put it over on that side?
Thank you.
I guess that is probably.
Yes, and hopefully people can still hear us back there. And if that's the case, we can figure out with the typing piece. Kate, can we hear us still? All right. Good old Zoom thumb. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Anna and Michelle, for getting us started with understanding your organization's perspective and bringing to the table around the multiple components of what we're trying to really unpack as we think about protection of renters, but also the bigger long-term investments that have not happened and how we really have to catch up in a more significant way. And it's not just a couple year issue to resolve. And I asked folks just to hold questions so we can hear from all three folks, and then we can have a kind of hopefully an enriched full conversation from all perspectives.
And I apologize, I have to head out to another meeting. Jess, who is here from CVOEO, is also on the steering committee of the Affordable Housing Coalition. And as Ann gets up to speed, I'm sure that Jess is happy to help answer questions as well. Thanks so much for your time today and for inviting us.
Yeah, of course, thanks for being here. All right, well, with that, let's pass it to Jess. Jess is the Assistant Director of the Housing Advocacy Programs at CVOEO, which is Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity.
Excellent.
There we go. Just lives in my neighborhood. I don't think you're technically my constituent, though. I think you're over the line, but it's okay. I'll still claim you as an Old North End neighbor. So thanks so much for being here.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting us, and thank you, Anne and Michelle, for setting that great context. We all know housing is such an important part of our lives. Where we live, it impacts where our kids go to school, our ease of getting to work, access to environmental benefits and challenges, and it's just so rooted in the health of our individual, family, and community health. And I'm glad that it's become more of a public conversation and that the legislature has really embraced this. So the CVOEO is one of the state's 5 community action agencies, and so we have 10 interconnected programs that and services to combat poverty, and programs doing weatherization, early childcare, housing supports, food security, financial capabilities, and all of this work is working towards addressing issues of social, racial, environmental, and economic justice, and also helping people achieve economic independence. You can't do any of that without having stable homes. And so while most of our programs, as you'll know by the name, Champlain Valley, are in the 4 county areas of Chittenden, Franklin, Grand Island, Addison counties, our statewide housing advocacy programs work all over Vermont. And so that gives us a really unique perspective into the lives of renters, of people living in mobile home communities, and people experiencing discrimination in their housing all over Vermont. And so, our work is grounded in a lot of the same principles as the Progressive Caucus's principles. We believe that housing is a basic human right and that everyone deserves equitable access to securing and maintaining a home free from discrimination. We're really painfully aware of the power dynamic at play in housing, and the fact that in a situation that we have now where there are simply not enough homes in the state, not enough homes for people at all income levels, and especially not enough homes at the affordable levels, that the people who are most pinched are the people who are the most vulnerable. And whenever there is a housing shortage like we have now, and especially such a low vacancy rate like Anne was talking about, the people who are excluded from housing are the people who are traditionally excluded and discriminated against in housing more broadly. Black and Indigenous people of color, LGBTQ plus folks, families with children, people with disabilities, people who've experienced trauma, and other vulnerable populations. Although we have really strong rules on the books, both at the federal and the state level, to protect against discrimination and harassment for all those groups of folks and a few more, they aren't always enforced. And when we have a tight housing market, it's a lot easier for discrimination to get covered up in other things. So every day on our Vermont Tenants Hotline, this is a statewide hotline that's available to any renter to call with any question related to their tenancy. We hear from families who are at risk of losing their homes because of huge rent increases, exactly what you were talking about. I had a little internal cheer when I heard about your new bill.
Thank you.
And so, people who are at risk of losing their homes because of huge rent increases, not $50, not $20, but $300, $500, $1,000 rent increases that they can't afford. People who are at risk of losing their homes because of no-cause evictions, perfectly legal, not having to leave at the end of their tenancy, not because of anything they did wrong, but simply because the property owner didn't want them living there anymore. And we hear from elderly people who are living without adequate heat or hot water, and can't get local officials to enforce basic health and safety regulations. We hear from immigrants and refugees who are putting up with substandard conditions or being harassed by landlords, but are afraid to complain out of fear of retaliation. We also hear from people who can't understand important documents that they're getting related, that are directly related to their housing security because they aren't written in a language they can understand. They're coming at them just in English. We also hear from people with disabilities who are being denied basic accommodations that would allow them to live safely and comfortably in their home. We hear from people who are legally denied access to their homes due to discrimination, who are told, no, we don't accept vouchers, or I'm sorry, I don't like who your spouse is, so you can't live with me, or you can't rent from me. We've also learned a lot from our housing voucher program. So last year, CVOEO administered the CARES housing voucher program, which provided about 270-ish vouchers for folks who were experiencing homelessness. And we had 500 vouchers available. Only a little bit more than half of the people who had vouchers could find a place to use them. And we have a new housing voucher program coming out, the Home Family Housing Voucher, which will work with families experiencing homelessness. And so we're hoping to get more of these vouchers out into the world. So in this work, like we can counsel people on their rights and responsibilities, we can make referrals, we can provide education and help connect people to resources, but it's not enough. So as Anne said, there's a lot of opportunity now. So the past couple of years, there's been a lot of progress. So it's not all doom and gloom, which is pretty wonderful. Significant state and federal investment in funding for new construction, programs like VHIP, the Vermont Housing Improvement Program, which is helping bring substandard properties up to usable. Up to use, new housing vouchers, like I mentioned, the changes to the rental housing safety programs will make a huge difference to add more teeth to our rental housing safety laws and to give the switch to of some duties from the Department of Health to the Division of Fire Safety will really provide support at a statewide level, but also at a local level, because a lot of these really critical health and safety issues are being addressed by volunteers, local town health officers who don't always have the support they need. They might not always have the training or the information to really enforce what needs to be enforced. And so these new changes are going to go a long way towards helping. And there's more opportunity to do that, to expand that as well. And then all of a sudden zoning is sexy, which is kind of exciting. Am I allowed to say that in official? I did, but there we go, on the record. Sorry. There's a lot more attention to the importance of zoning and how that impacts how and where housing is built and access to homes in our communities. And so I'm really excited for H68, I believe, and I know that a lot of the provisions of that zoning reform bill are also being built into the Senate's bill. So that's going to go a long way to changing the housing landscape by eliminating barriers to development. And a lot of these barriers to development, I think it's really important for us to be really aware of the fact that zoning was created as an exclusionary tool and as basically a racist tool in our communities. And so by eliminating the barriers to development when we eliminate the barriers that are rooted in these systems and these systems that were designed to segregate and exclude people, we're making our communities more accessible. However, I think even in that, it's really important when we think about zoning reform that we can't just be building more and assuming that it's going to trickle down to affordable housing and to the most vulnerable. So we need to ensure equity for housing. It's not enough to have enough affordable housing to make sure people have choice in where they live. And then we need to look at where affordable housing is located. So if affordable housing ends up being concentrated in specific areas versus distributed through the city, if affordable housing is built in just chunks here and chunks there, as opposed to mixed use housing, we might not be really getting the benefit that we're looking for. We don't want to be reestablishing these patterns of segregation and exclusion. So let's see. So what else can we do to really support? When we think about what's needed to help renters, obviously full statutory funding for for the Vermont Housing Conservation Board should always be right up there. We just need more bricks and mortar housing, no matter what. I talked about the importance of zoning. Supportive services to help people be successful in their housing, things like the expansion of Family Sash and other wraparound services. Often people need a little bit of support in their homes, and making sure that the social services are available, and having social services that are intimately connected to where people live have been proven to be really effective. We need better language access and culturally responsive practices to make sure that the services and resources and information are available to everyone, and that access to information is equitable. Everyone needs to be able to understand their rights and responsibilities as renters and their rights and responsibilities as property owners and managers as well. And there isn't enough of that education built into our systems. We also need to focus on household stability and retention. So not just getting people into homes, but helping to ensure that they're successful when they're there and they have the supports that are needed. Things like just cause eviction and eviction diversion, which Rachel will be talking more about when she's here from Vermont Legal Aid, are critical to make sure that just things like not being able to pay the rent isn't the one thing that's going to put someone into homelessness. Retention and mediation services that can help address landlord-tenant issues are really effective. Those should be continued and expanded. Anytime that we can work with folks before a problem becomes a crisis is good. And also, obviously, addressing the ongoing homelessness issue by, expanding transitional housing and helping fill that gap between transitional between general assistance and transitional housing. We also need to increase awareness and enforcement of fair housing. As I said before, we have these laws on the books that make it illegal for people to discriminate in housing. And it's really hard to enforce those laws. And part of it is that it's really hard for people to report these things and to make complaints when they're afraid of retaliation and losing their housing. And then also the process is really long. And if my goal is to get myself and my family into a safe and stable home, and I'm being discriminated against as I'm looking for housing, my first reaction may not be to file an official complaint and go through that process. I want to get into a safe and stable home. And so being able to have people take the steps they need to get into safe and stable homes and also use their rights to not be discriminated against. And there's an opportunity to be bold and not just react to this housing crisis, but to take steps to remedy it. Rent stabilization was on my Be Bold list, so I was glad to hear it. I would also encourage you to think about ways to write into any bill where there's any sort of subsidy for housing. Any property owner or landlord receiving state funds for rehab or rental assistance is required to receive fair housing training or just get access to basic landlord-tenant law. There's no training required to be a landlord in the state. And it's a tough job. And it's not an easy job, and we really rely on our property owners, big and small, to help us solve this housing crisis. And a lot of times they don't have the tools and resources that they need to be successful. So I could say more, but I'm going to stop. And I really thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and also just for the way that this caucus approaches addressing the needs of the most vulnerable in our communities. So, thank you.
And it's very common for people to get up and go because we are,
of course,
ever in flow at the State House here. So thank you, Jess. And with that, did you guys ready to wrap enough? Rachel, as you.
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm doing the multiple meetings at the same time today. You all know about that.
And I do want to guard a little bit of time for questions and discussion. So I'm going to try to keep you to 5 minutes, Rachel, if that's okay. So this is Rachel from Vermont Legal Aid, who serves as the director of the Disability Law Project. And thank you so much for being here. And so we've heard a lot about the layer on the systems of the funding and the tenants' rights and whatnot. And so if you want to it's okay to repeat things, of course, because that's
sure.
It is what it is. But please, share with us.
So in addition to being the DLP director at Vermont Legal Aid, I'm our government relations person in the building. So if you need someone, come find me, or Mike Fisher, who's the healthcare advocate. But Jumping right into housing policy, I think, you've all heard about the three parts of the stool, so I won't go over that again. I think the things that we think can really help right now are a rent rescue fund to prevent non-payment evictions and an eviction diversion program. We think 2 to 3 staff in the judiciary at about $1 million to $1.5 million a year can help us virtually eliminate non-payment evictions, which are the primary cause of eviction in Vermont. We have pretty good data on this. In 2019, we did a study. We used 2 counties, Windsor and Lamoille, as representative of the state. And about 1,800 to 1,900 evictions are typically filed in Vermont each year. The vast majority of them are non-payment evictions, most of which could have been resolved for $2,000 or less. That proved true with VRAP when we were able to avoid evictions even being filed or to get evictions dismissed through VRAP when they were dispersing funds for that. What was the average amount? Almost exactly $2,000. So for most people who can't afford their rent 12 months a year, the reason is $2,000. So with a rent rescue fund, we think we could avoid a lot of those. And we also think a diversion fund program that also includes a mediation option can help us avoid a lot of the landlord-tenant disputes that might lead to for-cause or even no-cause evictions. We would love to see no-cause evictions go away. I don't know that there's going to be the political will in the building to do that this year. And so these other pieces to keep housing stability strong really are where we are putting our focus and where we'd love to be working with you. The second thing that we think would really help is expanding Vermont rental subsidy. The reality is too many Vermonters who rent are rent burdened. I'm sure you've heard about that from your previous speakers today. And so if we can give people more money to spend on rent, that's great. The other piece of that is getting landlords to accept those subsidies. And one of the reasons we think the Rent Rescue Fund can be helpful is that you don't need the landlord to sign on to the HAP program in order for someone to get rent rescue to avoid eviction. But the more that we can get landlords incentivized to accept vouchers, the more likely that we are to be able to keep people housed and stably housed. Unfortunately, the lease-up rate for folks who have gotten vouchers has dropped dramatically over the pandemic from, correct me if I'm wrong, you might know these numbers better than I do, from something like 78% of people who came to the top of the list for Vermont State Housing Authority down to about 38% over the course of the pandemic. So it's becoming harder and harder for people, even when they get a voucher, to find a place to rent. And then the last piece is, whatever we can do to build more affordable housing. I'm the wrong Seelig for that. Please talk to Gus Seelig on those issues. But the more that we can develop more affordable housing that's perpetually affordable, the more that we can relieve the strain on the system. So that's I hope I stayed in 5 minutes. That's my pitch. Those are, I think, the 3 big things that we would love to see happen.
Tell your lawyer to stuck it right at the 5 minutes.
Perfect.
Well, thank you again to all 3/4 of you. I know Michelle had to leave, of course. I'd like to open up for questions from folks or even discussion. There was a lot of tangible ideas that you proposed, which I thought was really helpful as legislators. Some of us, I don't think we don't have a member on our caucus at least on the House side, the House General Committee, which handles housing policy, but we're always looking for ways to really influence policy discussions. And certainly some of the items you raised have been on my mind of how do we really leverage the major investments we've been having to really, I don't like the phrase trickle down, but it guarantees, I should say, a benefit to renters, and we just don't cross our fingers and hope for the best. That investments in blighted property, for example, is actually tracking down to the actual tenants that will be in that property once it's upfitted. So with that, any questions or discussion from caucus members or visiting legislators as well? Brian?
So I took some notes. I think, Jess, I'm going to need to get the list from CVOEO because it was a lot of things. And I don't know if I missed it, but is anyone talking about giving tenants the right to first refusal? Did you say that in your list?
I didn't, but it was in an earlier version of the list. Yeah, I think that's also a really good option. And then you have a bill for the interest last
There
session,
is one,
right?
yeah. It's going to be different this time.
Yep.
We last year, for those who don't know, it was like right of first refusal for tenants when their apartment buildings go up for sale. But feedback I heard from people from rural districts is that it's usually single-family homes there. So this time it's just when buildings go up for sale. So if it's a single-family home, they can have right of first refusal. And if it's an apartment building, they can try to organize a cooperative or work with a housing agency to buy it. And what I'm curious about is if that is something that you think would help, the connection between that and this money for first generation home buyers that's available for middle and low income homes. Like, is there any, like, do you see ways that we can kind of tie the right of first refusal with like organizations helping people navigate the money so that it's actually reality? Because I mean, if we do that, just imagine how many people can own their own homes in 4 years or own cooperatively owned buildings if, we paired the money with that right. So I just was curious about that.
I think there's a really good connection to be made there. And there's precedent because that law already exists in our mobile home communities. Mm-hmm. And so it's shown to be really effective. And there are some challenges around that co-op organizing that has to go along with it and the support that the renters to become owners will need, but as long as that support is there and if it could be linked to some of the other funding available for first generation home ownership, I think it would be amazing.
I think the technical assistance piece though that exists for the mobile home parks is key for that, right? Like none of these mobile home parks that have converted to cooperatively owned have done it on their own. They've had that assistance to do it. And so I would want to make sure that is funded adequately to be able to expand to non-mobile home park purchases. And I don't know if there's a way for in the home ownership centers to have that be maybe the place that it's housed for the single family home purchase option. I think the other place that it pairs well with is the very underused for those who do have Section 8 benefit to purchase a home, to use your Section 8 voucher to become a homeowner.
Can you do that?
Yes.
What?
See?
Yeah, I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah. And boy, does that create housing stability, right? And so being able to make that an easier pathway. Now, Section 8, obviously a federal program, but having people in the state who can help you navigate that pathway and figure out what you need in order to use that Section 8 voucher for a home purchase, I think is kind of part and parcel with what I'm hearing you talk about.
So I don't know if it's I'm going to ask, and if it's like, if the answer is no, because it's not your role, that's okay. But if I had a draft of the bill regarding the tenants' right of first refusal, would your organizations be willing to take a look at it before it's introduced and help kind of identify things, pieces like this? Because we can add pieces into that bill. I think we need to. I wrote some of what you said because we want it to work. We don't want, it's not symbolic. We want to do it and then have action happen.
Yeah. We're always happy to take a look at bills.
You're all different groups, right?
We're all different groups.
Yeah.
And I would have people who know more about that specific issue within legal aid look at it rather than just relying on
I'm going
me.
to send it to you. Okay. Thank you.
I have a question for out, and I'm just mindful House Appropriations is probably going to filter in, so we're going to wrap in about 10 minutes. You're more than welcome to stay with us. We're recruiting all the time for the person. So the I know, I'm always going to try that. Always going to try. So the renter credit program, formerly known as the renter rebate program, received some updates and that was implemented just last tax year. And I know I've heard from constituents who've been bumped out of the program in terms of eligibility because we dropped the income eligibility, changed the metrics and whatnot, which did move more resources to lower income families, people with multiple household members, of course, not a bad thing at all. But we did lose folks who make somewhere, I mean, it's rough math, but like from basically $35,000 to $47,000 a year, especially single folks lost out from that program, which does, every little bit helps. I'm just wondering if you've heard anything from folks in your channels around the renter credit program now, and how I'm going to be introducing a bill on this as well to look at the impact of it, maybe unintended consequences, as well as a better metric. Because the other piece about the way that we've updated that program is we default to using HUD data, right? And that does not match with the hot housing market, nor the reality of wages of existing in Vermont and the disparity between the two. So I think there's a better metric we can use for that program, underlying program. But also, I don't want to lose out on the folks who really could access that program and now are ineligible because of the change in the income eligibility. So I just don't know if you've heard any thing. I'm also happy to share my bill once it comes out to draft for feedback, but I'm just curious if you've heard anything from your constituents.
We have, if we have, it hasn't filtered to me, but I'm happy to talk with our tax folks in our low income taxpayer clinic and see if this is something they've seen. Their focus is primarily on federal income tax issues, but they often will then get state income tax and state tax questions. And so I'm happy to check in with them and see what they've heard.
I agree, Rachel. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's not something that we hear a lot of directly through our hotline. Although I'm guessing that if we asked, we would hear more because we're dealing with folks who have immediate crises, and they but I'd be happy to ask and see.
I'm just curious.
We also may not have heard much because that work happens through our poverty law project, which was one of our income restricted programs, and so people who got bumped out may actually also be bumped above our poverty law project.
Of course.
Income level.
It is interesting because if you think about, what do we mean by folks who are working folks who are low income, there's a wide range, right? And so there's, even in the change of the renter credit program, they called folks, I forget it's like extremely poor or what it's basically this program now focuses on versus folks who are slightly less poor, but still poor, which is that, and as we know, with the cost of living continuing to just grow, we're just losing out on a big component of Vermonters, I think. So, okay. I sense them coming soon. Yes. Introduce yourself as well.
I'm Joe Andriano. I'm from Orwell. I represent the Addison Rutland District. Thanks for putting us on, inviting members of other caucuses and to ask questions. I'm an attorney who's done landlord-tenant law. And I think that Matthew Desmond, who's a sociologist at Princeton, has demonstrated pretty well that when renters are faced with evictions, there's serious barriers inside the legal system to prevent them from asserting their various rights there. And so I'm curious if you might be able to speak a little bit to, if someone has a problem with their landlord and calls legal aid, first of all, is there capacity for the amount, this might be a CVOAL question as well, is there capacity for the amount of calls that you're getting, number one? And I guess my second question is sort of like, what sort of assistance can be offered through your programs if someone is faced with an eviction and may have some, colorable arguments to make as to why they shouldn't be evicted? So if you might be able to answer that.
Sure. So currently, approximately 87% of landlords are represented in eviction cases, and approximately 17% of tenants are represented in eviction cases. So that's a big mismatch. Right now, we have funding that is federal funding that will run out at the end of not this fiscal year, but next fiscal year 24, that allows, it's our Housing for Everyone law project. And what they do is everyone who's had an eviction filed against them, we get their name, we get their contact information, we send them a letter, and we say, we want to help you. We are offering to represent you in your eviction case. With the current funding, we can make that offer to everyone, and about a third of tenants are taking us up on it. So we would love for more tenants to take us up on it, to be able to work up the merits of their case and determine what their defenses are and how we can help them or connect them with, the resources that do exist in the community. So right now, we're at pretty good capacity for folks who are facing eviction. We also have capacity in another project within legal aid for folks who are facing loss of their voucher. And that's always been something we've been prioritized at legal aid because that voucher is so valuable. And if you lose it, Jess and others can tell you, you're not getting it back. And so protecting against those loss of vouchers, that's the other kind of big piece of the renter assistance that we do. Then the third piece that we do is we have our homeowners legal assistance program, also federally funded. That runs out at the end of this calendar year. That we're using to help people avoid foreclosure. Because if you lose a foreclosure case, you probably know as well, what happens then? The bank evicts you, right? And so you end up in eviction, whether you're a homeowner or a renter in that case. So right now we have quite a lot of capacity. For us to maintain that capacity, we're looking for an increase in our base of about $1.3 million this year. In order to keep doing the work that we're doing and keep doing the foreclosure work once the federal funds run out. So to the extent that you can put that in your committee's budget letters, and we can come talk to you about that, we're happy to do that.
Kate, do you have any questions, Representative Logan? before we start to wrap up?
No, thanks.
Okay, just checking. We see you there. Okay, any final comments or questions from Caucus or visitors before we wrap up?
Thank you so much for coming. Thanks for the invitation. It's nice to get to meet with you all.
Yeah, and I really want to emphasize the tangible policy ideas you're doing about this is really helpful as we navigate these big housing bills that are coming forward, making sure that we, again, are thinking about renters, centering renters, and understanding the folks who are at the end of the line and what we really need to be doing. Thank you again so much. That will conclude our meeting. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and don't hesitate to reach out with drafts of bills.
Yes,
and things like
yes.
this, because, you know.
And send them to everyone.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, no, totally. The drafting process, there's a lot still in the queue coming, so it's a little.
It's been a real slow trickle, it feels like.
Is it? I don't know.